There are places the world forgets. Places where time doesn't slow down, it simply stops. You won't find them on a GPS. They're buried beneath the noise of the modern world, tucked away like a secret too old and too heavy to carry. One such place is known by only a few and feared by most. Deadwood Holler. It lies somewhere in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains, where jagged ridgelines rise like broken spines and the valleys sink into shadow before the sun sets. Even locals don't agree on exactly where it is. Some say it's just a story to keep kids from wandering too far. Others swear they've seen it, or heard it, or felt it watching them when they strayed off the path. The name alone feels like a warning. Deadwood. Not just the trees, but everything about it. Lifeless, silent, unchanging. A place the forest has swallowed whole and never spit back out. There are no road signs that point to it, no trails that lead you there. If you're lucky or unlucky, you might catch a hint of it, a strange bend in the air, a sudden stillness in the birdsong, a sense that you've stepped through an invisible curtain into somewhere other. And if you do, the hills seem to fold behind you, the woods close ranks, and the way out disappears. In the early 2000s, a government census worker named Glenn Morrow stumbled across it by mistake. He was on a contract job, sent to update records in a patchwork county that hadn't seen a population review in over 20 years. Most of the residents were spread out along winding, barely drivable roads. Trailers perched on slopes, cabins clinging to cliffsides like moss. But there was one cluster of properties the census maps didn't cover. A blank zone, a splotch of green that didn't have a name, a number, or a registered address. Glenn was meticulous. He didn't like missing pieces. So he drove as far as his truck would take him, parked it near a rusted gate, and followed a path into the woods. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. He walked for over an hour. The sun dipped early behind the trees. The air grew damp, cool, heavy, not with weather, but with memory. Everything was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of his boots and his own breath getting louder. Then he saw it, a sagging cabin nestled in a bowl of overgrowth. Smoke twisted from a leaning chimney. A handmade sign nailed to a stump simply read, "Keep back." But someone was there. A girl sat on a swing made from rope and an old tire. She didn't look up at him, just swayed gently, humming something low and strange. Not a song, but a sound that seemed to repeat itself like a forgotten lullaby. Her clothes were threadbare. Her hair was long, uncut, wild. She looked young, maybe 30, but there was something ageless in her eyes. Not innocence, not fear, just stillness. When Glenn asked her name, she didn't answer. When he asked if her parents were home, she said, "We don't got those no more." He tried to radio for help. No signal. He stepped closer, and she flinched like a deer, but didn't run. Behind her, shadows moved inside the cabin. More figures, watching. He backed away slowly, marked the trail with his boot. He returned the next day with a county deputy, but when they reached the same spot, there was no sign. The trail was gone. The swing, the girl, the cabin vanished. Only trees and silence. Weeks later, Glenn turned in his resignation, said he wasn't cut out for that kind of work anymore. But before he left, he told someone what he saw. He didn't lie. He didn't exaggerate. He simply described what he found, or what found him. And that's how Deadwood Holler came back into the world, not through legend, but through a single man's encounter with a family that had slipped between the cracks of history. A family that, by all accounts, never left. The whispers began again, the rumors, the late-night retellings at diners and gas stations. Some say Glenn found the Callahans. Others say he only saw what the holler wanted him to see. But what everyone agrees on is this: you don't go looking for Deadwood Holler. Because if you find it, it might not let you leave.
They weren't supposed to be real. The Callahans were the kind of story you heard when you were too young to know better. The kind passed around bonfires and back porches, about a family so far removed from the world they didn't even know it was still spinning. A family that had carved out their own reality in the woods and never looked back. But Glenn Morrow had seen them. Not clearly, not for long, but enough to set something in motion. A week after his sighting, the state team was dispatched. Officials, social workers, local deputies. They called it a wellness check, a search, an outreach effort. But the truth, it was an attempt to confirm the unbelievable. They sent in 2 agents, armed not with weapons, but with clipboards and body cams. The forest swallowed them just like it had swallowed Glenn. But this time, they came back. And they brought the story with them. The Callahans were real. They lived in a cluster of decaying cabins, pieced together with whatever the woods provided: planks, tires, tarps, and time. The structures were crumbling but alive, stitched with rope and wire and rusted nails. Smoke curled from stone chimneys. Tin pans hung from trees. There was a makeshift scarecrow in a garden of dying corn. And there were people. A dozen, maybe more. None of them had ID. None of them spoke like anyone else. Their accents were thick, old, like something out of a black and white film. Their sentences short and broken, strung together in strange rhythms. It wasn't just the vocabulary. It was the cadence, the hush, the weight behind every word. They stared at the outsiders like deer might stare at headlights, not with fear, just stunned stillness. Like they'd seen something long thought extinct. One woman claimed to be 32. She looked 50. Her teeth were rotted, her eyes pale blue. She said she hadn't been to town since she was a girl. That was 30 winters ago by her own guessing. Another man, maybe her brother, maybe not, had a twisted leg and a voice that never rose above a whisper. He said he remembered when the men in blue coats came. He meant Union soldiers. He wasn't joking. The children were eerily quiet. 2 of them wouldn't speak at all, only mimicked animal sounds, hooting or barking in response to questions. One little girl, no older than 7, recited the same nursery rhyme over and over in a slow sing-song drawl. But it wasn't one anyone recognized. The most unsettling part wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't know. They didn't know what a telephone was. They didn't know the name of the state they were in. They didn't know who the president was or that presidents existed at all. One old woman asked, "Is the war done yet?" When asked which war, she blinked and said, "The one with the gray coats." They had no knowledge of the 20th century. No concept of the internet, of space travel, of civil rights, of currency. Time to them had folded in on itself. And they all bore the same last name, Callahan. No one used the word incest, but it hung in the air like a low fog. The gene pool was shallow, murky. The family tree didn't branch, it curled. And yet they seemed unbothered, calm, peaceful even. They weren't starving. They weren't violent. They weren't afraid. They were content. They had built their own world, leaf by leaf, stone by stone. And for them, it was enough. No calendars, no clocks, no mirrors. Just a fire pit, some cornmeal, and each other. They spoke of the sickness that once came through the holler, of winters so hard their ancestors slept stacked like firewood to stay warm, of a boy who left once and never came back because the sky was too big and the ground too loud. They didn't want rescue. They didn't want relocation. They didn't want anything from us. To them, the world beyond the trees had ended long ago, or maybe it had never existed at all. They were born there. They lived there. And when it was their time, they intended to die there too.
To the rest of us, it looked like ruin. Crumbling cabins, dirt floors, smoke-stained rafters, children in threadbare shirts and bare feet. But to the Callahans, it wasn't ruin at all. It was home. Everything in Deadwood Holler had been built, rebuilt, or repurposed by hand. A wooden frame here, an iron barrel there, roofing stitched together from tin signs and bark shingles. The windows were holes, covered with blankets in winter and mosquito netting in summer. Doors didn't lock. They didn't need to. There was no one to steal from, no one to fear. In their eyes, the holler gave them all they needed, and they gave back in their own quiet way. The soil wasn't rich, but they made it work. Rows of pale corn lined the edge of the clearing, guarded by scarecrows made from bones and old clothes. Chickens roamed freely, along with a few goats tethered to fence posts. They fished the creek when it wasn't frozen, hunted squirrel and possum when it was. They dried meat in the rafters, pickled roots in jars, and brewed something bitter from bark and berries. They didn't own much: a few knives, a rusted kettle, worn quilts patched with denim. Most of what they had came from the land, or from whatever their ancestors left behind. The Callahans lived close, not just physically, but emotionally. They were never more than a few feet apart, slept in the same space, ate from the same pot, shared everything, even memory. There was no privacy, no bedrooms, no secrets, just the tight-knit silence of people who didn't know any other way. And they didn't seem to miss it. The children didn't have toys, not in the way we'd define them. They carved shapes from branches, tied dolls from straw, and played hide-and-seek in the brush. Their laughter was soft, uncertain, like it hadn't been practiced in years. They didn't have books, didn't read or write, but they knew stories, hundreds of them. Told by the fire, in low voices, passed down like precious heirlooms. Tales of monsters in the woods, of men who walked too far and vanished, of a sky that cracked open once and bled light for days. No one knew if the stories were myth or memory, and it didn't matter. To the Callahans, those stories were history, and history was all they had. Their religion was a tangle of Christianity, superstition, and dreams. They spoke of the watcher in the trees, a spirit, or a warning, or both. They crossed themselves before entering the woods alone. They whispered prayers over the creek before drinking. They never chopped down the largest trees. Those, they said, belonged to the old ones. And every Sunday, without fail, they gathered in a circle and sang. Not hymns you'd find in any church, but long, slow chants with no words. Just sounds, vibrating through the chest like the hum of something ancient. They believed in death. They just didn't fear it. When someone died, they were buried under stones behind the cabin, in a patch of earth marked by wooden crosses and crow feathers. The family would sit vigil, silent, for days. No crying, just the sound of the fire crackling and the wind brushing through the leaves. They believed the dead never really left, that they walked in the fog, that their voices echoed in the birdsong, in the creak of trees, in the pop of burning wood. They believed in cycles, not progress, not growth, just rhythm. Spring, planting; summer, gathering; fall, canning, smoking, sealing; winter, waiting. And then again. They had no concept of wealth, no ambition, no envy. To them, survival was purpose. The holler was kingdom, and the Callahans were royalty of rot and root. When the state tried to introduce modern conveniences, solar panels, generators, even an emergency radio, the family stared at them like foreign objects. One man took a flashlight, clicked it on, and dropped it in fear.
Another tried to roast meat on a hot plate until it melted. They weren't stupid, they were simply untouched. One child offered a tablet to play with, turned it over, held it to his ear, then tossed it into the brush. It didn't speak his language. It didn't belong. They didn't resent outsiders. They pitied them. "You folks need too much," one of them said. "Too loud, too fast, can't sit still for nothing." That was the Callahan way. Stillness, silence, steadiness. The woods didn't hurry. Neither did they. It's easy to call it primitive, backward. But maybe it was just a different kind of intelligence, a deeper kind of knowing. One rooted not in books or wires, but in the soil. They built a life from that soil, and in return, the holler kept them hidden, protected, preserved, until the day the world came knocking, and everything they built began to unravel.
The Callahans had built a life untouched, but the world has a way of creeping in, slow at first, then all at once. It started with whispers within the county courthouse, among social workers and rural law enforcement. There were children living in the woods, they said, uneducated, unclothed, forgotten. And then came the photos, grainy, shadowy, taken from a distance. Images of a tar-shingled shack, a girl on a swing made from a tire and twine, a man, shirtless and pale, staring blankly from a darkened doorway. Most dismissed it at first, Photoshop, hillbilly myth. But the county couldn't ignore it forever. Eventually, a task force was formed, half public relations, half damage control. The state needed to know, was it real? Was there truly a family out there, unregistered, undocumented, unseen? A convoy of unmarked vehicles rolled out before dawn, driving past gas stations, coal towns, and rusting mailboxes. They reached the trail Glenn Morrow once walked, and then they hiked. Journalists weren't far behind. A major outlet had caught wind of the whispers. A documentary crew tagged along, with a promise not to interfere, only to observe. But what they saw couldn't be observed quietly. They entered the holler like colonizers in a strange country, and the Callahans met them not with hostility, but with confusion. Children peered from behind trees, squinting at cameras like they were magic mirrors. Women stood still, clutching each other's hands, blinking at the flash of phones and the sound of distant generators. The men came last, thin, slow-moving, dressed in patchwork clothes. They didn't speak right away, didn't ask questions, just watched. When a young officer offered one of them a bottle of water, the man turned it over in his hands like a piece of sky, then handed it back. The crew moved in carefully. The social workers approached with measured steps, offering blankets, snacks, pamphlets. But the Callahans didn't know what to do with paper. They didn't understand what they were being rescued from. One woman, who appeared to be in her late 40s, asked plainly, "Did y'all fix the war?" The worker assumed she meant Iraq or maybe Afghanistan. But then she added, "We been praying since Gettysburg." Another man, barefoot with a thick beard and wide blinking eyes, asked if they were with the telegraph people. It became clear quickly, this family didn't just miss a few years of history, they missed centuries. One of the children began crying when shown a flashlight. Another ran when a drone buzzed overhead. They weren't frightened of harm, they were frightened of noise, of novelty, of disruption. And yet, the Callahans didn't run. They let the outsiders in, let them see, because they didn't know there was anything to hide. There were attempts to communicate, clumsy, careful. One young woman, maybe 17, asked where the visitors came from. When told just outside town, she tilted her head and replied, "Ain't no town out there, only trees." She was right, in her own way.
The social workers tried explaining health care, schooling, legal guardianship. But the concepts fell apart at the edges. The Callahans didn't know what government meant. They didn't believe in money. They didn't understand the word future. To them, the world outside the holler was a myth, a story told by ghosts. And when those ghosts came knocking, cameras rolling, clipboards in hand, what the Callahans saw was not salvation. It was intrusion. Still, some complied. Children were examined. Some were removed. The elders didn't resist. They just faded, quiet, dignified, still. The documentary aired 6 weeks later. It was titled The Lost Family of Deadwood Holler. The footage went viral. People were fascinated, outraged, captivated by the idea that such a family could exist in the modern world. Commentators argued over blame, over who failed them, over who they really were. But no one asked the Callahans. The family didn't appear in interviews, didn't give statements, didn't sue, didn't fight. They simply returned to the trees, those who remained. And the rest? They were absorbed into a system they never believed in, never wanted, never understood. The Callahans didn't vanish in a storm of violence or tragedy. They faded like old photographs, slowly, silently. Some children adapted, most didn't. One boy ran away from a foster home and was found sleeping under a highway overpass, curled like a pup. Another was institutionalized after trying to dig a fire pit in the floor of his bedroom. The world tried to catch them, but they had never been built for this world. We called it a rescue, but maybe it was just an extraction of something rare, ancient, and ultimately unsalvageable.
They called it closure, the final visit. A last inspection of the site by state officials and legal representatives. 6 months after the world had discovered the Callahans, the story faded. The cameras left. The headlines stopped. The case was filed, boxed, and shelved. What remained was silence. The holler, once brimming with unwanted attention, returned to its natural rhythm. The birds came back. The brush grew thick again. And slowly, the forest swallowed everything. The cabins collapsed under snow and time. Vines coiled around the doorways like living locks. Rust ate through the metal siding. The footpaths vanished beneath the weight of fallen branches and moss. Deadwood Holler began to do what it had always done, forget, and make itself forgotten. No one moved in. No developers came calling. Even curious hikers began to avoid it. Because no matter how much the story had been picked apart, on newsreels, in online threads, by podcast narrators and cultural critics, there was something beneath it all that could never be explained. A presence, a silence that wasn't empty. It was watching. The remaining Callahans who had been removed from the holler, they scattered. Some adopted new last names, some were institutionalized, some ran off and were never heard from again. One young woman, barely 20, vanished after her release from a group home. Last seen heading north, muttering about needing to get back before the fog sets in. She was never found. A boy, now 16, was asked during a psychiatric evaluation what he missed most. He replied, "The trees knew my name." The world had given them beds, heat, hot water, and yet they never truly left the woods. Not in mind, not in spirit. Because the holler wasn't just where they lived. It was who they were.
It held their language, their rituals, their dead. It was their church, their history, their womb. A place without clocks or currency or expectation. A place where survival was worship, where stillness meant safety. And when that world was stripped away, however well-intentioned, the Callahans didn't join ours. They simply dispersed, like mist. The land where their cabins once stood was eventually marked uninhabitable, too remote for utilities, too unstable for construction, too burdened with memory. But even today, the forest doesn't quite let go. Locals say strange things still happen there. Noises in the night, campers waking up miles from where they bedded down, trails appearing one day, gone the next. And sometimes, they say, a light flickers deep in the trees, a dull orange glow, like a fire left unattended. But no fire tower can spot it, no satellite picks it up. It just pulses, then fades. Some say it's wind. Some say it's the ghosts of the Callahans. Others believe one or two returned, found their way back through the brush and the dark, back to the roots that remembered their footprints. No one goes to check. Not anymore. Because even now, after everything, Deadwood Holler still holds the same warning. Come too close, and you might disappear. Not all at once, but slowly. First, the sounds of traffic fade. Then your watch stops ticking. Then the wind stops blowing. And then you stop needing to leave. The Callahans never ran from the world. They didn't reject it. They simply forgot it. And in time, the world forgot them back. But the forest didn't. It never does. So if you ever find yourself on a path you don't remember taking, if the woods go quiet and the air turns thick, and you feel like something just stepped behind you but didn't make a sound, keep walking. Don't stop. Don't follow the flicker. Because Deadwood Holler is still there, waiting. And it remembers what the world tried to erase. The family who never left. Because to them, there was nothing else to leave.